The moment my wife Natalie walked through our front door with her boss Clint Foster trailing behind like a lovesick puppy, I knew tonight would be memorable. Just not for the reasons she expected. "Ray, honey, you remember Clint from the company picnic?" she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Behind them came Megan Park, Natalie's work buddy, clutching a bottle of expensive champagne like it was liquid gold. I wiped my hands on the kitchen towel, studying the trio. Clint wore his usual smug expression, the kind that screamed, "I own everything I see." Megan kept glancing between Natalie and Clint with barely contained excitement, like she was watching her favorite soap opera unfold in real time. "Of course," I said, extending my hand to Clint. "Welcome to our home." The handshake lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. His grip was firm, possessive even, and his eyes held mine with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won whatever game we were playing. Here's what they didn't know. I'd been watching, listening, learning. For 3 weeks, I'd noticed the late nights, the hushed phone calls, the way Natalie's face lit up whenever her phone buzzed, the way she'd started dressing differently, buying expensive perfume, claiming it was all for important client meetings. Tonight, she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while she freshened up. The text messages between her and Clint painted a vivid picture. So did the ones with Megan, where they laughed about my clueless husband act and planned tonight's little performance. "I'll bring dessert if you bring the whipped cream," Clint had texted yesterday. "Ray will probably serve us his cheap wine and think he's being generous," Natalie had replied. Well, about that wine. I'd spent the afternoon carefully replacing the expensive bottles Natalie had bought with something special from my collection. A 1987 vintage that looked impressive, but tasted like vinegar mixed with regret. The kind of wine that left a lasting impression for all the wrong reasons. "Shall we eat?" I announced, gesturing toward the dining room. The table looked perfect. Candlelight flickered across the good china, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Natalie beamed as she took her seat at the head of the table, with Clint positioned strategically to her right. "This looks wonderful, Ray," Megan said, though her tone suggested she was surprised I could manage anything beyond microwave dinners. I poured the wine with ceremonial care, watching as each glass filled with the ruby liquid. Clint immediately launched into a toast, his voice booming with practiced charm. "To Natalie, a remarkable woman who brings excellence to everything she touches." The way he said everything made my jaw clench, but I kept my expression neutral. They clinked glasses and sipped. I watched their faces carefully, waiting for the moment when the wine's true nature revealed itself. Clint's smile faltered first. Then Megan's eyes watered slightly. Natalie, ever the actress, managed to keep smiling even as her throat worked to swallow the awful vintage. "Interesting choice, Ray," Clint said, setting his glass down with barely concealed disgust. "It's from my special collection," I replied. "I've been saving it for just the right occasion." While they struggled through dinner, making polite conversation about work projects and weekend plans, I excused myself to refill the water pitcher. Instead, I retrieved Natalie's phone from the kitchen counter. Her messages were still open. 3 weeks of evidence, all neatly organized by date. Screenshots took exactly 30 seconds. Then I opened her contact list and found the group chat she'd created for tonight. Birthday crew. Perfect. I typed quickly. "Ray's in the kitchen. Can't wait to see his face when he figures out what's really happening here. This is going better than we planned." Send. The message appeared to come from Natalie's phone. Within seconds, responses started flooding in from Megan and Clint, each one more incriminating than the last. I returned to the dining room with fresh water and an innocent smile. "Everything all right?" Natalie asked, though she was too busy gazing at Clint to really pay attention to my answer. "Just perfect," I said. That's when Megan's phone buzzed, then Clint's. Their faces went from confused to horrified as they read the messages they thought Natalie had sent. Nat, Megan whispered urgently, did you just text us? Natalie frowned, patting her pockets. My phone's in the kitchen. Why? The color drained from Clint's face as he stared at his screen. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how their private conversation had suddenly become visible to everyone in the group chat. Perhaps, I said, standing slowly, we should address the elephant in the room. I walked to my laptop, which I'd positioned strategically on the sideboard. A few clicks brought up the screenshots I'd just taken, displayed on the large monitor we used for family movie nights. 3 weeks ago, you started planning this evening, I said, my voice steady and calm. Not as a birthday celebration, but as some kind of elaborate joke at my expense. The messages filled the screen, each one more damning than the last. Natalie's face went white as she read her own words projected for everyone to see. Ray, I can explain, she started. Oh, please do, I interrupted. Explain how you and Clint have been meeting at the Riverside Inn every Tuesday for the past month. Explain how you've been using our joint credit card to pay for it. Clint pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Now wait just a minute. No, you wait, I said, clicking to the next screenshot. Here's where you discussed bringing Megan tonight so she could film my reaction when I finally figured out what was happening. You thought it would be hilarious content for social media. Megan's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent room like a gunshot. The best part, I continued, is this message from yesterday, where you debated whether to tell me tonight or wait until after our anniversary next month. You know, the anniversary where we're supposed to renew our vows in front of both our families. Natalie stood abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. You had no right to go through my phone. You had no right to betray our marriage, I replied, but here we are. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Clint tried to salvage the situation with the kind of corporate smooth-talking that probably worked in boardrooms but fell flat in my dining room. Ray, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Natalie and I work closely together, and sometimes professional relationships can be misinterpreted. Professional relationships, I repeated, clicking to another screenshot. Is that what you call this message where you describe exactly what you want to do to my wife in vivid detail? His face turned red as his own words appeared on screen. Megan made a small, choking sound and covered her face with her hands. You're all welcome to leave now, I said quietly. The show's over. They scrambled for the door like the house was on fire. Natalie grabbed her purse but left her phone behind in her haste. Clint didn't even bother with goodbye pleasantries. Megan stumbled after them, still clutching the broken champagne bottle. I watched from the window as they huddled in the driveway, voices raised in heated argument. Clint kept pointing back at the house while Natalie gestured wildly with her hands. Megan stood apart from them, apparently having second thoughts about her role in the evening's entertainment. That's when I noticed Mrs. Kitchener, our elderly neighbor, standing in her garden with a watering can, obviously eavesdropping on every word. She caught my eye through the window and gave me a subtle thumbs up. 20 minutes later, my phone started buzzing with text messages. Mrs. Kitchener, it seemed, had quite the social network among the neighborhood wives. Word was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. But Clint wasn't done. Around midnight, I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the bedroom window, I watched him stumble toward my garage, clearly having spent the evening drinking away his embarrassment. I slipped out the back door and circled around through Mrs. Kitchener's yard, keeping to the shadows. He was trying to force open my tool shed, probably looking for something to vandalize or steal. Looking for something? I called out from behind him. He spun around, nearly losing his balance. You think you're so smart, don't you? Smart enough, I replied, holding up my phone. The camera was already recording. Smart enough to document you attempting to break into my property at 12:30 in the morning. You ruined everything! he snarled, taking a step toward me. I didn't back down. I didn't ruin anything. I just turned on the lights. He lunged forward, but 3 beers had clearly affected his coordination. I stepped aside, and he crashed into the garbage cans, sending them clattering across the driveway. The noise was tremendous in the quiet neighborhood. Lights started coming on in houses up and down the street. Mrs. Kitchener appeared on her porch in a bathrobe, phone in hand. "Should I call the police, Ray?" she called out loudly enough for the whole block to hear. Clint scrambled to his feet, realizing how the situation looked. A drunk man harassing his employee's husband in the middle of the night, caught on camera by multiple witnesses. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing toward his car. "Yes," I said calmly. "It is." The next morning brought consequences neither Natalie nor Clint had anticipated. Mrs. Kitchener's network had been busy overnight, and by 9 a.m., half the town knew the basic story. By noon, the details were filling in. Natalie returned around 10, looking haggard and desperate. She'd obviously spent the night at Megan's apartment, planning some kind of damage control. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the kitchen. "I think we said everything necessary last night." "You don't understand the position you've put me in," she continued, pacing back and forth. "Clint is my boss. This could cost me my job." "Your job," I repeated slowly. "That's what you're worried about. We have a mortgage, Ray, bills, responsibilities. You can't just destroy my career because you're feeling insecure about my wife having an affair?" She stopped pacing and turned to face me. For a moment her mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating underneath. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said quietly. "It was just excitement. Something different. You've been so distant lately, so focused on your engineering projects. Clint made me feel special. Special enough to humiliate me in front of our friends? That was Megan's idea. She thought if we could get you to react badly, lose your temper, it would make the divorce easier. I could claim you were unstable." The casual way she said divorce hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated plan to destroy our marriage and make me the villain in the process. "Well," I said after a long moment, "I suppose I should thank you for being honest." She looked confused by my calm response. "So we can work this out?" "Oh, we're going to work it out," I agreed. "Just not the way you're thinking." That afternoon I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Pete Morrison, my old college roommate who now worked in corporate investigations. The second was to a lawyer. The third was to Clint's wife, Jennifer. Jennifer Foster was a kindergarten teacher who'd been married to Clint for 15 years. She'd always seemed nice at company parties, though I'd noticed she looked increasingly tired and stressed over the past few years. "Mrs. Foster, this is Ray Ackerman. I think we need to talk." The meeting took place at a coffee shop downtown. Jennifer arrived looking nervous but determined. I'd brought printed copies of everything: the text messages, the credit card statements, even a few photos Pete had managed to dig up from the Riverside Inn's security cameras. She looked through the evidence methodically, her expression growing harder with each page. "How long?" she asked finally. "At least a month that I can prove. Probably longer." She nodded slowly, then gathered up the papers and put them in her purse. "Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry it had to be this way." "No," she said, standing up. "You did the right thing. I've suspected for a while, but I kept making excuses, telling myself I was being paranoid." 2 days later, Clint Foster was served with divorce papers at his office, in front of his entire staff, including Natalie. According to Pete, who'd maintained contacts throughout the local business community, the scene was spectacular. Jennifer had hired one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the state, and she wasn't interested in quiet settlements. Natalie came home that evening in a rage. "You vindictive piece of garbage!" she screamed, throwing her purse across the living room. "Jennifer Foster is taking Clint for everything he's worth. The company's in chaos. They're talking about bringing in outside management. Sounds like consequences, I replied, not looking up from my newspaper. My job, Ray. They're restructuring the entire department. Megan's already been transferred to another division. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to record my humiliation for social media. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out her next move. The tears, when they came, looked genuine enough. I made a mistake, she said, sinking onto the couch. A terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. I'll quit my job if I have to. Start over, I repeated, like none of this ever happened. Yes, exactly. I folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside. There's just one problem with that plan, Natalie. What? I don't want to. The final piece fell into place 3 weeks later. Pete had been busy with his investigation, and what he'd found was better than I dared hope. Clint Foster hadn't just been cheating on his wife. He'd been embezzling company funds, using corporate accounts to pay for his affairs with multiple employees over the past 2 years. Natalie was just the latest in a long line of conquests. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified expense reports, unauthorized use of company credit cards, even payments to a private investigator he'd hired to dig up dirt on employees who'd rejected his advances. When the story broke, it made the local news. Tech CEO arrested on embezzlement charges. The footage showed Clint being led away in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions. Natalie watched the broadcast from our living room couch, her face pale with shock. Did you know? She asked quietly. About the embezzlement? No. But I suspected he was hiding something. Men like Clint always are. She turned to look at me, and for the first time in months, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. What happens now? Now you pack your things and leave. The divorce papers were filed this morning. Ray, please. You wanted excitement, Natalie, something different. Well, congratulations. You got it. She tried arguing, pleading, even threatening, but my mind was made up. The woman I'd married had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of casual cruelty and calculated betrayal. 2 hours later, she was gone. The house felt different without her presence, quieter but somehow cleaner, like a fever had finally broken. Mrs. Kitchener knocked on my door that evening, carrying a casserole dish and wearing a satisfied smile. Thought you might need a home-cooked meal, she said, bustling into the kitchen. Terrible business, all this drama. But sometimes the trash takes itself out, doesn't it? I accepted the casserole gratefully. Sometimes it does. That Foster man always seemed slippery to me. And your wife, well, she shook her head disapprovingly. Some people just don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. After she left, I sat in my quiet kitchen, eating her excellent pot roast and thinking about the future. The house was mine. The mortgage nearly paid off thanks to my careful financial planning over the years. My engineering consulting business was thriving, and I had good friends who'd stood by me through the chaos. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely at peace. The phone rang around 9 p.m. Natalie's number appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I answered. What, Natalie? They arrested Megan too, she said, her voice thick with tears. She was helping Clint with the fake expense reports. They're saying she could go to prison. I'm sorry to hear that. You're not sorry. You planned this whole thing. You wanted to destroy all of us. I considered her accusation carefully. Had I planned it? Or had I simply allowed their own choices to play out to their logical conclusion? I wanted my wife to be faithful, I said finally. Everything else was your decision. The line went quiet for a long moment. I loved you, she whispered. No, I replied. You didn't. If you had, none of this would have happened. I hung up and turned off the phone. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its evening routine. Porch lights flickered on, families gathered for dinner, children played in backyards before bedtime. Normal life, continuing as it always had. I poured myself a glass of good wine, really good wine, not the vinegar I'd served at that disastrous birthday dinner, and raised it in a silent toast. To new beginnings, to justice served cold, to the simple satisfaction of watching karma do its work. The queen had fallen from her throne, and I was finally free.